A minute or so for everybody to join us. Good morning, everybody. Just wait a minute or so for everybody to join us. We've got quite a number of people registered for this event, so if you can give us a minute, please. I'm going to start at 10:31 just to give those people the chance to join. Okay, I'm going to kick off with a couple of housekeeping things, if we can, please. I'm Jürgen Peterson. I'm responsible for transport technologies with Systra. You're attending the Future Fuels webinar from Land O'Lynx. Really appreciate everybody's time and attendance today. And as I said, from a housekeeping point of view, if we could keep cameras and mics off, unless you want to speak. Any questions, if you could add those to the question and answer box, that'd be great. We will try and get through as many questions as we can after each of the speakers. Any unanswered questions that we don't manage to get to, we'll try and get answers to by, well, as soon as we possibly can, but certainly by the end of the week, just to try and keep you informed as to what's happening. Before we get started, I'd really like to just introduce the panelists in general. I'll get them to introduce themselves for a minute. We're going to start with Kwame. Kwame, could you briefly introduce yourself, please?
Hello, good morning. My name is Kwame Biko, and I'm a commercial director for Zero Petroleum based in London. And basically, we produce synthetic fuel.
Thank you, Kwame. Fiona, could you introduce yourself, please? Have we got Fiona? I don't think we've actually have Fiona at the moment, so we'll come back to Fiona. Kenneth, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hello, my name is Kenneth Nathanaelsson, and I'm working at the Swedish Transport Administration, and I'm the deputy of our electrification program.
Thanks, Kenneth. And Tom, over to you, sir.
Morning, everybody. Tom Reed here. I'm the policy director at the Renewable Transport Fuel Association. So that's the RTFA. We are a trade association for producers and distributors of renewable fuels, primarily with a UK focus. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. As I said, I'm Jürgen Peterson. I'm responsible for transport technologies. My remit takes into account future technology, future fuels, and future transport. I've written a number of articles on future fuels. I wouldn't suggest that I'm an expert in any way, shape, or form, because I'm really not. I'm really just trying to understand it, trying to understand what our options are as we move forward into the future. I've just noticed that you're joined by Fiona. So Fiona, I'm going to come back to you in a second if I can. The way I see it at the moment, and the reason I wrote the articles, is really to better understand and better try and push forward the debate on future fuels and really understand what is available to us, what technology will do, and whether we're actually embracing the right future fuels in the right way at the right time for a sustainable future. At the moment, all our emphasis and all our effort seems to be on battery electric vehicles, and I'm concerned that we perhaps are not necessarily understanding the cradle-to-grave carbon footprint that BEVs will actually provide. We do already know that BEVs are in general about a third heavier than their ICE siblings. We also understand that that's actually producing more particulates. We now believe those particulates could be more harmful and more damaging than carbon dioxide and NOx. And as a result of that, I wanted to really start a debate and really start a scientific discussion rather than a political discussion on how we should move that forward and whether we should be looking elsewhere. With the group of panelists we've got today, we're going to hear a number of different options available to us. all of which don't relate to BEVs, and that's deliberate at this point in time. At the moment, as I said, I think BEVs are getting far too much of the limelight, or far too much of the spotlight, should we say, than perhaps some of these other technologies, which are equally as exciting and, in my view, could actually do more for us. I've mentioned hydrogen a few times. Hydrogen is, I think, one of our core options available to us. The naysayers amongst us are going to suggest that it's energy inefficient. That is, produce hydrogen through the electrolysis process is not particularly useful, not particularly helpful. The big difference is that hydrogen is storable, such as some of the other future fuels we'll hear about today as well. Yes, it's difficult to contain. Yes, it can be potentially dangerous. But there again, if anybody's seen a lithium-ion battery go off, then I'm sure you'll realize that lithium-ion is equally as dangerous. On that note, I'm going to pass across to the panelists. But before I do that, I would like Fiona, if it's okay with Fiona, just to give a brief intro, and then we'll pass across over to Kwame. Fiona, if you could give a brief introduction, please.
Yes, good morning. I do apologize for being late. My name, I work for a company called River Simple Movement Limited, and we are pioneering lightweight, hyper-efficient hydrogen cars. And I'm looking forward very much to sharing the sort of business case for that with you today. We're based in Mid Wales, and we are as I say, a small car company, and we're trying with trialists at the moment, our cars.
Thank you, Fiona. On that note, I'm now going to pass over to Kwame. Kwame, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here today. So as I mentioned before, my name is Kwame Biko, Commercial Director for Zero Petroleum. Essentially, I'm focused on aviation, but a lot of what I'll be speaking about today will be related to the automotive sector. So with that, I'd like to go into the next page of the slide, please. And essentially what we do at Zero is we reinvent fuel. So, you know, if you just look at the next slide, that's really our tagline, the motto of what we do. And I think on the next slide, we all sort of understand why it is we need to reinvent fuel. We all know the importance of the energy transition and really just the key to move towards sustainability. And really our solution to this problem, if again you go on to the next slide, is what we do, which is essentially producing a fuel simply from air and water. So I'll talk a bit about the process by which we go through to create this fuel, which is a synthetic fuel. And with that, I'd like to go on to the next slide, please. So essentially, we talk about the different forms of energy that can be used in this energy transition. Now, this slide pretty much relates to aviation, but it can relate to many other sectors which are very hard to abate, such as agriculture and construction industry and shipping. I mean, I think one of the things we realize is that, you know, for electrification, it works very well in some cases, particularly in the automobile sector. But, you know, with regards to construction, with agriculture, even with regards to defense and military, you know, you can end up having an asset that has about 50 times the weight, which is a real concern when you're speaking about commercial margin. Now, hydrogen, particularly with aviation, requires cryogenic tanks, which is significantly heavier, which paves many, many problems essentially with that. So essentially our feel and what we believe is that liquid fuels is always going to be a demand on the market and primarily for the assets that are in operation today. So I'd like to just go on to the next slide, please. One of the reasons why we believe synthetic fuels is the answer is because number one, it's 100% fossil free. As I mentioned, these fuels are made simply from air and water, from hydrogen and carbon dioxide. So you've got unlimited scale, you know, so essentially you have free and abundant feedstock available, unlike biofuels, which are limited to the amount of land and water resource. What is very key is energy independence. Now, we say this because at the moment, and if you look at geopolitics, we have about 22 countries producing about 90% of the world's energy in the form of liquid fuels or fossil fuels. Now, essentially, when it comes to the key feedstock of this synthetic fuel, which is renewable power, every country has some form of renewable power, be it wind, solar, hydro, geothermal. And we believe that moving forward, this can actually be a form of energy independence to nations. So this is an industrial process. We're essentially taking something that happens in nature, which is photosynthesis, and putting it in a factory by absorbing carbon dioxide using, for example, renewable energy like solar, air and water, to produce a fuel. So essentially, it's an industrial process which you can optimize and continue to bring down the cost. I think one of the key arguments with the fuel we produce is the high cost of energy that it requires, but this is something that we believe is coming down dramatically. And if you go on to the next slide, I can just demonstrate how we believe the future is going to look, because for us, this really is a Tesla moment in the synthetic fuel industry. At the moment, the market is about 0.1% biofuels, but of course that is going to hit a limitation once you're limited in the amount of land and water that can be used to produce these fuels. But we believe that as the price begins to scale back, that in the next 25 years, 25 to 27 years, synthetic fuels could be almost half of the fossil fuel market, which is a $5 trillion market. And I think on the next slide, what we do is we actually demonstrate how this price can actually come down with time significantly. And that's primarily due to the reduction in renewable energy costs, the coming down of the cost of electrolyzers, which go into the production of green hydrogen, and really just the integration of all of these products that make for a more efficient system. So now, if we go on to the next slide, I'd like to talk a bit about really just, you know, the team, the company, and what makes Zero Petroleum and what drives us. So, you know, I mean, going on to the next slide, I think one of the things that is really fundamental is the team. And we're a startup. We're founded by Paddy Lowe, who I think many of you who may be interested in Formula One may know that he's a very popular British engineer from Formula One, the former technical director for Mercedes, McLaren, and Williams Group. And in fact, a quarter of our team actually come from the Formula One industry. And what this actually does is it drives the culture and the way in which we are actually tackling this problem, which is very much on a simulation basis, you know, really just modeling every part of the plant in terms of the production of the fuel and tracking all those metrics to further optimize the production. Because one of the things we believe is that the winners in this field are those who can produce the most amount of fuel for a given amount of energy. So if you just go on to the next slide, we'll just highlight some of our achievements. And in 2021, we were the first to actually test this fuel in an aircraft, receiving a Guinness World Record. And we've gone on from there to test it in luxury cars, in chainsaws, in small jet engines, in motorbikes. And essentially what we're trying to demonstrate is a drop-in solution that requires no modification to the engines or the assets that it's powering. Now, on the next slide, I'll really just touch on the crucial element, which is actually how we actually produce the fuel. So as I mentioned, air and water come in. We capture the carbon using a process called direct air carbon capture. This process is maturing quite dramatically. At the moment, we are also supplementing the carbon dioxide with biogenic sources of carbon dioxide. And then on the green hydrogen side, we use electrolysis to produce the hydrogen elements. The hydrogen and the carbon dioxide together form a syngas, which goes into our version of Fischer-Tropsch, which is essentially a catalytic process that produces different types of hydrocarbons. So we've got gasoline, we've got jet fuel, and on the heavy ends, we've got diesel. And I think one of the things that's really key to take away from this slide is the production of the hydrogen, which is actually the energy molecule, actually consumes about 95% of the energy of this process. So we can just go on to the next slide, just a couple more to go. And so as I mentioned, These are drop-in fuels which go directly into the acids and internal combustion engines. So the gasoline has the high octane levels required for the engines, and the jet engines also have the aromatics necessary for all the elastomers in the engine. So it's a true drop-in fuel that requires no blend with fossil-based fuels. On the next slide, please. What I'd like to do is just show a couple minutes video just to highlight some of the achievements of the company. So thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Kwame. We have a couple of questions which you may want to try and take, actually. The first one is actually coming from me. What is the time to market? I noticed you've suggested that by 2050, 50% of the market will be synthetic fuels. But when could we actually start seeing this? Or how quickly can we start seeing this being delivered to the average person?
Thank you for the question. So essentially, we are looking to go to commercialization in the next 2 years, and it's going to be a gradual scale-up process, as you can imagine. It's something that we've tested and demonstrated over the past few months and years. We've signed strategic partnerships with a couple of airlines and OEMs in the aviation space, but also in the automotive space. So right now, we're working towards certification of the fuel, working to get a consistent mix. And then from there, it's really commercialization from 2024, 2025.
Thank you so much. We've got a number of questions coming in from the webinar attendees. I'm going to start off with one from Thomas Lancaster, and I'm going to try and read it verbatim. Is it not misleading for combustion alternatives to compare against H2 and batteries based just on energy density? Efficiency of energy use via an electric powertrain versus ICE is also a key factor.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I think just, moving into the energy transition, we need to basically realize that we are looking at different forms of energy. I think one of the things we say is that there are 1.5 billion cars, trucks, lorries, sort of internal combustion engines in operation today. Now, all of these vehicles need a solution to decarbonize. On top of that, you've got 33 million ships, 40,000 aircraft, and the list goes on and on. Now, today, we're still producing over 200 million internal combustions every year. I think between now and 2050, we're still going to have millions and millions of internal combustion engines in operation. And, for us, we're providing a solution which is drop-in to meet that need. And I think that for us is what is key. It's very clear that electrification is very efficient. It's very true, but we need a solution to meet the needs today. And I think that's our stance.
Thank you. I appreciate the answer. One of the questions that has cropped up a couple of times, and I'm going to paraphrase because it's been phrased in different ways by different people, is what is the overall carbon footprint of processing? You're kind of suggesting it's carbon neutral. Is that actually the case? What about the energy required to actually produce this in the first place?
Yeah, that's again a very good question. I would say that at the moment, the carbon that we actually absorb from the atmosphere, because we're using direct air carbon capture, is the energy that is used in the fuel. And after combustion, that same carbon, which is actually used to produce the fuel, is re-emitted back into the atmosphere. So it's a fully circular process. And now it needs to be sustainable, and that is driven by renewable energy. So that's why we rely on hydropower or green hydrogen. So it's a fully circular system.
Okay, you dropped out there for a second, or you did on my end, but I think we got sufficient from that. There is an interesting question, which I do want to ask, because I think it does actually I think we're probably all asking it to a certain extent. To confirm that emissions are CO2, this would not address decarbonisation. Essentially, what you're saying is carbon neutral, not decarbonising. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's carbon neutral. And I think one of the things we try and send across is that carbon is not the enemy. the enemy is carbon from fossil sources. I mean, you know, we still need carbon in our atmosphere, in the biosphere, right? So, and to some extent, we need to sequester carbon because, of course, a lot has been re-emitted. So, I mean, there will be applications out there that will sequester carbon. And I think there's a lot of investment now into carbon capture and sequestration, or into rocks, or into, you know, sort of products and things like that. And I think that's one thing to bear in mind. Our process can actually also produce and absorb carbon and use that to produce construction materials or plastics or things like that. So I would say down the line, we could actually look to be carbon negative. But at the moment, we are tackling the solution to be carbon neutral. And I think these are the firm commitments that we have made, you know, generally as a society.
Okay, thank you, Kwame. On that note, we have got other questions, which we will get to if we can. If not, we'll answer those later. At this point, though, I do need to pass over to Fiona, if I can, please, Fiona.
Thank you. Yes. So if we could have the first slide up, please. Thank you very much. Yes, so I introduced us earlier. I think I want to also explain that we are also a startup company, although we've been in the sort of R&D phase for a number of years, in fact, a couple of decades. And our purpose statement of our company is that we are pursuing systematically the elimination of the environmental impact of personal transport. Two words very important there, which is systematically. We are working, we know that it's going to take us a while, so we're doing, every decision we make is in that direction, but we're not going to get there overnight. And the second one is elimination. Nobody talks about that. People talk about reducing their emissions, etc., but they don't talk about eliminating them. But either you're sustainable or you're not. It's binary, rather like pregnancy. So less unsustainable is still not sustainable. So we are very clear about our focus as a company. And I just wanted to mention the sort of hornet's nest that Rishi Sunak stirred last week in the automotive sector, because you know, he chose a surprising point of inflection. The 2030 date that was set for banning the sale of new diesel and combustion engine cars is 7 years away. In other words, it's the Parliament after next. So it took us all by surprise. And the manufacturers who typically work on a 7-year cycle are already geared up for that 2030 date. But what we did recognize is there's some honesty in noting that the grid is not fit for purpose for an all eggs in the battery basket solution. But in our view, the solution is not just push the date out 5 years, but to diversify into some other baskets, which is why we're so pleased to be here today. Another point that I think we also felt that was right is that we have to take the public with us in anything we do. And we can see a looming void coming in the small, affordable car segment. Could we have the next slide, please? It seems to me there's an emerging crisis for an everyday car user looming ahead of us. Forget the cost of living crisis. The cost of motoring has in fact increased 30% in the last 5 years, and an entry-level, bottom of the range, two-door Mini One costs nearly £23,000. And the battery version of that is another £10,000 on top for a quarter of the range. So it's quite a difficult deal to swallow. And what's happening at the same time is that the OEMs are walking away from this small car. We were all very sad to see the end of the Ford Fiesta. Incidentally, that cost £19,500 earlier this year. But also the VW Up, the Golf, the Renault Zoe, the Twingo, they are all going. And what has sort of caused that is that they're very, very low margin, very hard to make money on those lower end cars. And the scarcity of materials that hit the car market last year, and and the sort of COVID pause made all the OEMs focus on the higher end, higher margin cars, and their balance sheets are looking a lot better as a result. And Carlos Tavares, the CEO of Stellantis, has pointed out recently that the production costs for EVs are 40% higher for the internal combustion engine cars. So it's very, very hard to produce those smaller cars profitably. But nevertheless, it's an enormous market. 500,000, over 500,000 last year of the new cars sold were in the small car segment. So at Riversimple, we've been thinking about that and have considered really designing from scratch, absolutely fundamentally, to deliver a fresh concept that's going to be affordable in that area. And the fundamental thing, I think, Jürgen, you mentioned it earlier, which is lightweight. So the simple lightweight is less energy and less tire pollution. And the only way to get there that we know of is to use hydrogen. So could we have the next slide, please? We're working on a very fresh concept to deliver affordable independent mobility, zero emission vehicles designed from scratch to run on hydrogen, very lightweight, delivered on an all-inclusive monthly subscription for a total cost of ownership equivalent to a petrol, the bottom of the range petrol Mini, very enjoyable to drive, easy to refuel, and with a decent range. So a total sort of package, if you like, a total concept. Next slide, please. So here, these are the trial cars we've been running, and we've been running these for about sort of 4 or 5 years now. And they are, the critical thing to look out on here is that they are made of carbon fiber for weight reduction as well. The total vehicle weight is 660 kilos. They run on a small fuel cell, 10 kilowatts. That's about 3 kettles worth of power. But we have a bank of supercapacitors into which all the braking energy is recovered. There are no batteries, so we aren't reliant on all those critical materials that are sitting, on the Chinese side of the world. And we have 4 it is still an electric car, but it's running on hydrogen. So we have 4 in-wheel motors. I've just chosen a bunch of pictures here to show you, the car in London, going around the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, in Glasgow, and in the Welsh Hills. So we've been everywhere with this car. And we are still learning an immense amount from members of the public who are taking it on and trying it out. But it's not the car that we plan to come to market with, because it's actually not as practical as it needs to be. So next slide, please. The future lineup that we're looking at are a little 2-seat runabout in the first instance, because it's the cheapest thing to produce and the cheapest thing to run. Very low carbon hydrogen consumption, very versatile. You'll be able to fit a wheelchair in the boot, and it's really for sort of local use cases, and that's to do with the refueling, which I'm going to come on to. Then we will do a 4-seat compact car, and then a full sort of motorway capable intercity 5-seater. Next slide, please. Now, you may be asking, because this is what the government says all the time, and everybody you hear about hydrogen, they go, well, hydrogen's just for the big stuff, and batteries will cope with all the small stuff. So we don't need anything but batteries for passenger vehicles. Well, I can tell you that we do an immense amount of sort of talking to the general public, and the number of people who come up to us and say, I'm just waiting for one of your cars, please, because batteries are not going to do it for me, is incredible. So we have a long waiting list of people who are interested in this. But I wanted to make a sort of technical point, which is that it's not a question of size. It really isn't. You could have a battery truck, no problem, if you only needed to do 50 miles a day. and you could refuel it overnight, recharge it overnight. It's not a question of size. It's a question of range, uptime, utilization, regular or not regular duty cycles, and refueling. The market in which fuel cell vehicles are the most popular is on the right on this slide, which is forklift carriers, pallet carriers in warehouses. In fact, most of America's food is moved by hydrogen pallet carriers in vast warehouses in the States. That's not a big vehicle, but it is uptime that counts there. And so that's its merit. So the issue that we need to look at is the use cases of range, uptime, utilization, and then how easy or simple is it to refuel. Next slide, please. We did a research project funded by Innovate UK in Milford Haven. I don't know if you know that. It's a small town on the, in fact, a port town on the edge of Pembrokeshire. And we were looking at estimating hydrogen demand for a 2050 use case. And the demand that the hydrogen public refueler would need to meet on a daily basis. And we identified 7 user groups for whom hydrogen vehicles would be useful. So I've already mentioned passenger vehicles, light duty passenger vehicles owned by fleets. Then you've got light commercial buses, heavy duty trucks, off highway. So all the mining, the construction, etc., and anything else that we could think of. Next slide, please. Just to let you know, Milford Haven has a population of about 14,500, and we did a street-by-street analysis of the housing stock. And in Milford Haven, the availability of off-street parking was there for 63% of all the housing stock, but 37% had no off-street parking, which we are taking as a proxy for. It's very difficult to overcharge your car, your battery car, overnight if you don't have off-street parking. And in fact, the UK average is 39% of the housing stock will never have access to overnight charging. And I can envisage if the only zero emission option is a battery electric car, you will have fights for the lamppost on your street if you live in a say on a terrace, in a street of terraced houses. So that gives us we took actually only half of that, 19% as the percentage that might need a hydrogen version of a zero emission car to work out the full scale demand. So if we could have the next slide, please. On the basis, and this is really Milford Haven case, going bus by bus, how many cars enter the town on a daily basis, how many are in light vehicles, light duty fleets, what we got in emergency services vehicles like ambulances, etc. And we worked out, as you can see, there are kilos for each of those. And what's interesting is that when you look at it, 580 kilos altogether for passenger vehicles, it more than equates the heavy duty trucks at 450. So you end up with quite a heavy demand of roughly 1.7 tons so 1.7 thousand kilos of, what am I saying? 1,770 kilos a day of hydrogen needed. Now you're going to ask, where is this hydrogen coming from? At the moment, it's largely grey hydrogen, just as battery electric cars are. If they're charging from the grid, they're not charging from green electricity only. I want to show you the next slide, please, that hydrogen infrastructure, which is really thin on the ground, by the way, isn't the end of the world. There are all sorts of transient options. So the big picture on the right, the Motive Fuels Tyseley is the state of the art, offering 1,200 kilos a day, and it's fueling buses. It's a big commitment in Birmingham. But next to it is a sort of a small container-based solution that is with the hydrogen transported to site that is offering 450 kilos a day. So there are transient things, and then next to that, this Octopus refueler, which is in fact delivered by NanoSun, it is a container that's just shipped in, filled up, and then replaced. So, and that can sit in the corner of a car park with no trouble. So in terms of transition, there are examples out there, but ultimately, I think we want to see hydrogen on a pump in a forecourt. And last slide, please. We see the local authorities are as the key enablers to this transition. So we talked to a great many of them, and they are already, we are in dialogue with authorities who are already running battery electric vehicles in their fleets, but they're looking for alternatives for other use cases, the ones that the battery electric vehicles can't meet satisfactorily. So constant uptime, range. Monmouth County Council has a catchment of 270 square miles, and you know that is a lot to look after, and they need alternatives for some of the local authority needs. They also have declared climate emergencies, and they're taking that very seriously. And they have a duty of care to enable the community at large to decarbonise. And I know this is fraught with anxiety for councils. They really are, they care a lot about it and are trying to do the right thing. But they're in a position, in our view, to encourage infrastructure development, but they're not required in this case to subsidise it. It really, the companies are out there waiting to come in and put the refuelers in. If planning permission and other things can be, helped or, encouraged, I think it will make a huge difference. And so, and then you've got bus fleets and delivery vehicles and zero emission refuse lorries all waiting to be part of the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. That's very interesting. A couple of questions that have come in, and a lot of them are around the same vein, is how quickly do you think it would take us to get a hydrogen refueling network in place, and at what cost?
Okay. The cost is, right, so how to tackle that? It depends on, we've basically got a strategy which is to start locally and grow a nationwide network organically. In other words, creating catchment by catchment sufficiency. So if, say, take a city like Oxford, there's a ring road around Oxford that everybody passes to get in and out of the city. And frankly, you could have one refueler on that ring road, and you have the entire catchment of 25 miles radius around Oxford would be available for that one refueler. So I suppose we're saying, because it only takes 3 to 5 minutes to fill up, that the solution has to be catchment by catchment, and that you have a business case for each one. Commercially speaking, there are a number of companies, one's called Element 2, that are committed to putting in refueling, but they're not going to start by doing 300 refuelers all at once. They're going to do them catchment by catchment, which is why it makes sense to surround a particular location with a number of vehicles, so that you build up that bit by bit.
Understood. So I suppose it's coming back to the same kind of question, though, I'm afraid. What kind of timescales before we get a reasonable hydrogen network in place, not just for private vehicles, but also for commercial vehicles? Because at the moment, it doesn't seem that we're investing very heavily at all in hydrogen, and certainly not the government perspective.
No, the government's absolutely, is nowhere here. I mean, yes. So, no, we can't look at the government. It absolutely, as I say, I think the people with the power in this case are local authorities, because they honestly hold the keys to this, and they can make it. They can expedite it. What they also need, though, is the vehicles. So everybody talks about a chicken and egg. Actually, the key thing of vehicles, because if they've got demand, the refuelers will be there tomorrow. And as I say, you can have there's an interim stage with all those container versions of refuelers that can just sit on a car park in the local supermarket or the retail park, and I don't think it would take any time at all. Quite frankly, if there were demand for it, you'd have them in 18 months' time. There's nothing to stop it. There's nothing to stop it but demand. So if the demand is there, the refueling will be there. But the key then is the cars or the vehicles. And there are, Symbio buses Symbio vans, Renault are the people to look for that. There are Kitano buses, which are owned by Toyota. There's Wrightbus, which is owned by the Bamfords. There are all sorts of vehicles out there. They were just not at critical scale. And again, it is sort of chicken and egg, but I think some commitment would make a big difference. I don't think it would take at all long.
No, but it all comes down to funding, doesn't it? And one of the questions we've had in, I think we should just move off my screen. Give me 1 second, I apologise. Do LAs have the funding to deliver any HT refueling networks? Or is that something we should rely on business to provide?
The private sector will fund it. The private sector will fund the refuelers. The local authorities don't need to fund the actual refueling. Where they are helpful is in helping to encourage open doors to the planning authorities. Just all of that can take an immense amount of time. So somebody who shows willing on that. So I can give you an example. We've put our own refueler into a small town called Abergavenny in the middle of Monmouthshire. Monmouthshire County Council took the trouble to, one, find us what they considered the best location for that refueler. To help us prepare all the forms and the paperwork to put to the council and to the planning officers, and to answer all the difficult questions that they wanted. So they helped us. They held our hand to get the planning permission in place for that. That's all they did. In fact, it's cost them the revenue of 6 parking spaces, and they had to get that sanctioned. But that's not a lot.
No, understood. On that note, Fiona, thank you so much for your time. We're going to pass over to Kenneth, please. Over to you, Kenneth.
Yes, hello, my name is Kenneth Nathanaelsson, and I'm working for the Swedish Transport Administration. And our responsibility is that we are working as a road and rail infrastructure manager for the Swedish government. And I will start to say something in a more broad perspective, how we are working with electrification at the Swedish Transport Administration. And then I will go more deeply into how we are actually working with electrical roads. So please, next slide. Next. Actually, in Sweden, we have actually laws about how we are going to reduce our carbon dioxide. And so if you look at this picture, the main thing is that if we look at to 2020, that's kind of how we are working historically with this. And the upper curve is if we are working as business as usual. and the yellow one is if we are actually taking the actions that we actually have planned so far at that stage. But if we do that, you see that we actually have the red line left to actually achieve our goals at 2045, that is with zero emission. And we see that that's actually where the electrification of the transport, the road transport system will have the most impact. So that's actually, we see a need to electrify the transports are really high. So that's why we are working with it. Next slide, please. But you have listened to two great speakers here that have golden solutions for this. But we as a road administration, we think that we will probably need a lot of tools to actually get to these goals. So if we are going to reduce our carbon footprint to zero with the domestic transport system, we need to use a pathlet of activities here. And for example, we have to increase the efficiency in the transport system. We are working, for example, longer and heavier transports. We are working with biofuels, and we are working, of course, with static charging and also dynamic charging, that is electrical roads, and hydrogen and other solutions. Like we are also looking at battery swapping and vehicle to grid, and how can we use all these kind of tools to actually become carbon free. Next slide, please. So our strategy is actually that we have to work to we see that the static charging will be the backbone within our system. So we have to work with that, and also with hydrogen, because we, for example, especially for heavy transport. And we see that we have, for example, the new AFIR directive in Europe that we will implement. Because it's also it's a directive, so we have to do it. And also we are looking at ERS, that is electrical road systems, but we are currently looking into it. How will this be a potential solution? But we are, as I'm going to say, we are doing some activities there. So during the next year, we will know more about this, and you can take the next slides. So electrical road system, what is an electrical road system? It contains of different things, but you can divide them into four parts, you can say. That is, you have the main electrical grid. For example, in Sweden, we don't have so many local grids, but we have a kind of central grid. And we also see that within an electrical road system, we also have to build a grid along the road that actually distribute the power to the vehicles. And that's the transformation part there is actually what the electrical road does. And we have different techniques for that. But then we also have to integrate it within the road infrastructure, and that's might be, for example, if you have some techniques, you also have to have some road barriers for traffic safety, and you also might have to have some monitoring systems and traffic management systems and so on. So it's you have to also to work with the road infrastructure. Next page, please. So in Sweden, we have actually demonstrated 4 solutions on public roads. We started with the conductive system in Sandviken. That is the catenary system above, that you take the power from above, like a rail system almost. We run that for 4 years, between 16 and 20. And it was a success. It worked, but we were only looking at the technique, and you recall this is a research program, so we are actually buying knowledge from this demonstrates. That is, we build it, we got the knowledge, and then we dismantle it. Then we also had a test in Arlanda between 18 and 21, and it was a conductive rail system. And it was the same there. They also delivered the knowledge that we asked for. And then we are actually running 2 demonstrative projects right now, one in Lund, in the southern part of Sweden, with also a conductive rail, but they have 2 solutions. One where they have the rails a little bit above the road surface, but we will not use that on Swedish road. But so the other solution is where you have the same level as the road surface, and that's the one who we as a transport administration are interested in. They are delivering, and the same for the one in Visby, where we are testing buses and trucks. And they are also continuing and are running as we speak. We are also doing winter tests for these 2 that we are testing right now. So we have up in the northern part of Sweden, we are really stress testing winter tests there, for example, related to frozen ground problems and so on. But so far, the techniques seems to work. Next page, please. So, but we have also plans for building a permanent electrical road. That is, we will keep it after we have built it and actually use it within our transport system as a permanent solution. So we have been working with that, and that's in the middle part of Sweden, where we have a lot of terminals and so on. So we have a lot of heavy trucks running there. We can take the next picture. So what we have done here so far, I want to say that you should understand, when you are building a demonstrate project, you can do it within half a year or something like that. Just put it up, and then some permits, of course, you need, and then you can dismantle it. But if you're going to build something permanent in Sweden, it's a totally different process. So as you see here, it's a couple of years, and it will also be even longer, because I think we will not have it for 28, 29, something like that, as it is right now. But what we done here was that we had a technical neutral procurement process here that we launched, I think it was a year ago, something like that. But actually we have stopped it right now, and we will we will go back and actually look into what kind of requirements and so on that we actually have put, because the cost was a little bit too high for this system. So we had to go back and analyze why it was so high, because we didn't have any funding to go on with it. Next page, please. So if you look at this picture, the pilot, the permanent road stretch, it was the Hallsberg-Örebro. You see it at the picture where it is. And we also conducted an assignment for the government where we look at potential electrical roads in Sweden. Where should it be most profitable to build? And that was actually the red roads here. If you look at the routes, it's actually the connection between our 3 major cities and a little bit more. That is Stockholm, Gothenburg, and Malmö. and that's where we have our the most of our traffic. And the blue ones is the other ones that you could continue e-road with, because it's rather expensive to build an e-roads, and you have to get the benefits from it, and the benefits come from the reduction in CO2, and also it might also be that it's cost effective for the transporters. So the next, please. I think so what are we doing right now? The current major activities at Swedish Transport Administration when it comes to electrification. We are working with a program for the deployment of charging and hydrogen infrastructure. We will actually, together with another authority, we will actually deliver an assignment to the government. That is a program within approximately a month, actually. And we are also, as I mentioned, with a permanent pilot, we are actually analyzing how we can actually build this pilot in a more cost-effective way. And I think it will take a while to do that analysis. And we are also working to have a suggestion of a deployment plan for ERS, and where we also describe the consequences and so on from the deployment that is related to cost and benefits and so on. So the government gets some kind of documents to make a decision. And we are also continuously follow up how we are working with electrification in the society and especially the transport system. We are doing that continuously to see what we had to do more to become more effective. So I stop there. I think it was farther on schedule, I think.
Thank you, Kenneth. Really very interesting. Okay, a couple of questions. The first one from me, I'm afraid. What vehicles are able to utilize these ERS systems in your trials? Do you have manufacturing agreements to put vehicles on these trials, or how do you accommodate it?
No, actually, we are, as I mentioned, we are buying knowledge from the providers of this different kind of systems. So they are actually putting the vehicles on the test on the road, so to speak. Yeah, but it has mostly been trucks and buses. But I know that there are some light vehicles also.
So is it fair to say that most of the pilots that you're doing at the moment are more specific to freight movement than passenger cars?
It was our first, so to speak, challenges. It was for the heavy trucks. So yes, it has been that focus, but we don't see in the future. We don't see that it's not necessary just heavy trucks.
Okay,
but of course it depends on the technique, as you. For example, catenary system is not so suitable for light vehicles.
No, absolutely. That's a good point. Okay, Kenneth, I'm afraid we're going to have to move on. If we have any time at the end, we can come back for more questions, if that's okay. On that note, I am going to move over to Tom. Tom, over to you, sir.
Thank you, and thanks to all the previous speakers. So as previously said, I'm Tom Reed from the RTFA, the Renewable Transport Fuel Association. If we move on to the first slide, please. I think, whilst obviously this is called Future Fuels, we're the near future. So we've heard a lot about things which will come in due course. I think the case of renewable fuels is that to some extent they are already here, but they can potentially play quite a big role in the nearer future. So at the first half of my presentation, I was going to give a bit of an overview as to what renewable fuels actually are, and then go into a couple of sort of case study type slides. Keep it relatively brief. So there's three main classes of renewable fuels, one of which isn't actually renewable. So the first one is biofuels. A couple of previous speakers mentioned those. The energy in them comes largely from plants. Those plants absorb CO2 during their growth cycle, so that if you then harness that energy and use it as a fuel and release the CO2 again when those fuels are combusted, you're approaching carbon neutrality. So again, as a previous speaker mentioned, these are not complete decarbonisation. There's always some fugitive emissions, but they are very, very tightly monitored. So within biofuels, there's two subdivisions. There are those made from crops and those made from wastes. Now, UK government policy massively favours the ones made from wastes, and I'll come on to that in a sec. The other renewable type of fuel that RTFA members produce are e-fuels. Again, we've heard from two speakers previously who mentioned these quite extensively. So Zero Petroleum's output would count as an e-fuel. So that would either be hydrogen made using renewable power, or something that you've made out of that hydrogen. So combine hydrogen with carbon dioxide and make, for example, methanol. You could then do various catalytic processes to convert that methanol into diesel or jet fuel. Or you could do, again, what Zero Petroleum do, which is produce a sort of a syngas using a hydrogen and carbon dioxide, which can go through a Fischer-Tropsch unit and make the normal range of fuels that a refinery might make. They come under a variety of other different names. For some reason, when they're used in aviation, they're referred to as power-to-liquid fuels. When they're used on surface transport, they're called renewable fuels of non-biological origin, or REFUNBOs for short. And then lastly, in a different colour to single them out, are recycled carbon fuels. Now, there's no one producing those in the UK at present. Most of the projects in the pipeline would like to be able to make these. These are fuels made from waste plastics, by and large, not targeted specifically at pure streams of waste plastic, but where it's municipal solid waste, which is a mixture of waste plastic and food waste and cardboard and so on. So it's where you have a mixed waste that's difficult to treat. You could potentially turn all of that waste into renewable fuels. So the food waste, cardboard fraction would be a biofuel, and the bit from the waste plastics would be a recycled carbon fuel. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So I think the thing to bear in mind is that they do deliver significant carbon savings. As I say, not 100%, but getting there. So the other good thing about them is that they can be mostly used in existing vehicles. So there's a lot of discussion about what future technologies will be along, and I personally believe they will be along, and we'll have the choice to be able to buy hydrogen or electric or other forms of vehicle in the future. But if you're trying to buy an electric 44-ton lorry at the moment, your choices are quite limited, whereas you could run a 44-tonner on renewable fuels right now. And again, in a minute, I'll come on to a couple of people who are already doing that. So something you may or may not know is that the biofuels particularly are already out there, already being produced, already being consumed. When you fill up at a petrol station, if you buy diesel, you'll see it says B7 on the pump handle. That means it has up to 7% biodiesel in it. And similarly, petrol has up to 10% ethanol, which is why it's labelled E10. All this has been created by legislation by the UK government. It's something called the Renewable Transport Fuels Obligation Order, the RTFO. And that requires the big petrol and diesel suppliers to supply a portion of their product from renewables. Something I cannot emphasise enough is that for these fuels to qualify under the RTFO and meet the government targets, they have to be sustainable and they have to be audited as such. So they can't people often talk about biofuels and they say, well, I once read in The Guardian that forests are being cleared in Indonesia or in Argentina, and palm or soy, respectively, were being planted to make biofuels. That quite possibly is happening. Those fuels are not coming to the UK. Fuels have to be sustainable if they're supplied under the RTFO and audited as such by a number of different people with many different layers of auditing and checking. I've never worked in an industry where there has been so much scrutiny of sustainability credentials of a product as with biofuels. And so lastly on this slide, the RTFO is a market-based mechanism that brings renewables more or less into price parity with fossils. So the more or less is added there because it's a market-based mechanism, prices go up and down. So certain renewable fuels at certain times have been in price parity with fossil. It depends which renewable fuels you're buying and when you're buying them, because it does fluctuate. So if we move to the next slide, please. So again, sorry, still dwelling on the credentials of these fuels. Greenhouse gas savings are measured using something called life cycle analysis. So this is a comparative tool, essentially. And what they say is, so we know what the carbon emissions from burning fossil diesel are. They're 94 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule. The GHG performance of any renewable fuel supplied in the UK has to be measured against that. And then that's given as a carbon intensity or a percent saving. And this does take into account growing and the harvesting of the crop, if it is crop-based, collection and processing of the raw materials and conversion into fuels and onward distribution. So all of the energy used, whether you're moving the materials around, the conversion processes at the factory, all of that has to be taken account of. And I would argue, given that this is something I've done for a living, calculating life cycle analysis of almost any product, you'd be very lucky to ever have something that was 100% carbon neutral, unless the entire supply chain was also carbon neutral, and possibly, or more than likely, you had some form of carbon sequestration alongside, because there's always going to be some fugitive emissions somewhere along the supply chain. There's somebody somewhere using a diesel lorry or using ordinary electricity to do their processing. So we move on to the next slide, please. Something I also cannot emphasize enough. So this graph is taken from the government's website. It shows energy used in transport modes, and you can see it's overwhelmingly road transport takes the biggest share. One of the things that we also like to point out is that graph is representing pretty much entirely fossil fuel use. There'll be a bit of renewable fuels in the road sector, none in the others pretty much. So fossil fuels have been used for a good reason. They are comparatively cheap and abundant compared to all the other alternatives. They're easy to use, they're easy to distribute. If there were other, better, easier solutions than fossil fuels, we'd have started using them ages ago. They're there, and they've become essential for our way of life. I'm not particularly defending fossil fuels. I'd quite like to see the back of them. But nevertheless, the reason we use them is they are so convenient. And it's, as you can see on the right, government policy is targeting different renewable options at different sectors, because there's not going to be one replacement to fossil fuels. There just simply cannot be. So rail, I think the government's plan is largely to electrify. Water, meaning maritime, power to liquid, so e-fuels type things. As things currently stand, biofuels and renewable fuels are targeted very largely at surface transport, so road vehicles basically, and particularly heavy goods vehicles. Longer term, we'll see more biofuels and renewable fuels targeted towards the air sector, because they have far fewer options when it comes to decarbonisation. Whilst there are such things as electric or hydrogen planes, they're still quite in the sort of infancy stage of development. So if we move to the next slide, please. So what I'm trying to say really is that renewable fuels are the near future. So I think it's very interesting hearing the other speakers today. I think we will see all of those things come along in due course. If you want to decarbonise today, and there's no better time to do it, your options are much more limited, which is where renewable fuels come in. So you can deliver real carbon savings measured by the things that I've mentioned previously. That picture there actually features two RTFA members. So John Lewis Group, who own Waitrose, they've got a fleet of lorries, 44 tonners doing the motorway work that run on methane. And then CNG Fuels, who operate those pumps, another RTFA member, they supply renewable methane. So renewable methane is chemically identical to natural gas, but it's made largely at anaerobic digesters, which take in materials such as sewage or food waste or farm waste like manure, essentially putrefy that material to produce methane, a mixture of methane and carbon dioxide. The methane is separated and put into the national gas grid, and then you can take an equivalent amount out somewhere else, run your lorry on it. So that's what John Lewis do. That I can't remember off the top of my head how many lorries they've got, but they've got a substantial fleet now of lorries, and they're not the only fleet operator doing this. The graph on the left is showing the number of methane-powered vehicles currently registered. That's just data taken straight from the government's own website. You can see under the vehicle licensing statistics page somewhere that the number of gas vehicles has been steadily increasing. It's gone up quite markedly in the last couple of years. About 1,800 lorries on the road. There are also quite a few buses out there. I couldn't find the graph of that one, but doing a lot of miles. So those 44 tonners will be being run on quite long shifts, running on renewable methane with equivalent carbon savings. So they would have a carbon saving of around about sort of 80%, I would say, compared to using fossil fuels. So my argument is, yes, electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles will be along in the future. It's only a matter of time. But if you feel that you haven't got time and you want to do this straight away, these vehicles can be bought right now and fueled right now with these fuels. So if we go on to the next slide, please. So when you think of decarbonisation and environmentalism, probably the first two things that jump into your mind would be McDonald's and Formula One. But nevertheless, again, some 44 tonners here. So McDonald's run their lorries on chip fat. So they have a company who have the contract to collect the used cooking oil from their restaurants. That is converted into biodiesel, and they run their lorries on that. Biodiesel is a particular type of fuel. It's made in the UK, usually from waste cooking oil from chip shops and restaurants. On the right there, you see the DHL lorries. They are running on a different form of diesel replacement called HVO, which is hydrotreated vegetable oil. That's a bit more expensive than regular biodiesel, but is slightly easier to use in terms of things like changing filters on the lorry. I mean, you can use HVO as a direct substitute to diesel. You could just stick it straight in any diesel vehicle, and it will run on it without any problems at all. So if we then move to what I think is my last slide, please. So a little bit just about the RTFA. So we've got about 50 members. They cover a variety of different companies. We've got comprehensive membership of every producer of renewable fuel in the UK for the transport sector. We've also got a lot of other companies who either ship renewable fuels in from elsewhere or manufacture them elsewhere and wish to sell into the UK market. We've also got quite a few members who are hoping to develop plants in the future. So a big part of our membership are companies hoping to develop plants that will make renewable aviation fuel. Still all at the project stage by and large. Most of them hoping to turn municipal waste into jet fuel. They'll also produce diesel alongside the jet fuel because you don't only make jet fuel via that process. Spread very heavily towards the sort of industrialized parts of England, but some out in the other regions of the UK as well. One of the key things that's on that map is that there's 50 CNG or LNG filling stations around the UK, mostly associated with the main transport networks or off motorways. Some are CNG, some are LNG. You need a different type of lorry depending on which you use. Some are public access, some are for captive fleets, but even those will allow other captive fleets to use their facilities under negotiation. So any questions anyone might ever have about renewable fuels and what they can do to decarbonise their fleet right now, please let me know. There's my details. Thank you.
Thank you. A few questions. That was really interesting. Thanks, Tom. A few questions have come up. I note we've only got 13 minutes left, so I'm just going to go through these rather quickly, if that's okay, Tom. The question is, why don't we just increase some of the additives being added to fuel already to make them more carbon friendly?
When you say additives, do you mean renewable component?
Yes. To be clear.
So there's a variety of reasons why we don't. One is, again, previous speakers mentioned that biofuels aren't the only solution because they have limited volumes. There wouldn't be enough biofuels around to replace all of our fossil fuel usage. So it would become unsustainable if the blending obligation was raised too quickly. And the government do quite a lot of modelling work on working out what the UK's capacity to produce and including import renewable fuels is versus global demand. Obviously, as more of the fleet is electrified, you've got a diminishing pool, so that the proportion could go up and still be the same number. There are also issues with some biofuels cannot go over certain percentages without engine manufacturers getting a bit jumpy about warranties, because things like filters and stuff can cause problems. So it's all about what's sustainable, so that you can take biofuels so far, you just can't go over a certain limit.
Interesting. Okay, thank you for that. And in terms of biofuels, where do we stand at the moment for using cellulose-based technologies to develop biofuels at the moment, rather than food-based production?
Well, so cellulose is harder to break down. So the biofuels are categorized in generations by and large. So first generation ones where essentially it's not that different to a whiskey distillery. Really, take a grain and you ferment it to make alcohol, and then you distill that alcohol to make ethanol. That's pretty basic technology. It's well established and was the toe in the water essentially for the industry. In due course, more plants will come on stream. So we've got a member called Nova Pangea Technologies. They do cellulose-based ethanol. It's just a more expensive process. Ethanol is a more complicated material than wheat grain. It takes more processing to break it up and make it into the sugars that are then required to make into ethanol.
Okay, so that's not going to be something we see in large-scale production for a while. Is that what you're saying?
I wouldn't say not for a while. It's just slower than the main grain side.
Okay, understood. Okay, on that note, so I've got a number of questions for all the panelists, actually. And the most pressing one, I think, has come up a few times. If we could actually get fuel to be completely carbon neutral, would that in any way change our travelling habits, or should that in any way change our travelling habits? Should we be looking at more sustainable communities and actually reducing vehicle miles travelled? Should we be looking at healthy communities as a result of some of these innovations coming through for future fuels? Healthy communities, livable communities, and even lovable communities for that matter. And I'm going to pass that out to the group. I'm going to actually start with Fiona, if you're okay with starting with that one, Fiona.
Yes, no, I'm totally on side. I think we should. If we can lower the number of vehicles needed to transport people about, I'm all for that. And active forms of travel, communities that are designed to make walking and cycling and buses take over public transport, be the main vehicle use, I think that's marvelous. I think no, we are completely on side with that. I think that is helping to eliminate environmental impact if we can see that happen. We are there to trying to look at the use cases outside those kinds of communities. I think it makes complete sense. We'd like to see more car sharing, fewer vehicles, more movement, retained independence.
Thank you. I'm going to pass the same question over to Kwame, please. So you're on mute, Kwame.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Excellent, great. Yeah, so I think absolutely. I think I share Fiona's points. Clearly, if we can reduce the amount of travel on the road, this will be a plus. But I think we need to bear in mind that, we're in a much more globalized world. Travel, mobility has become something that is very innate in what we do and how we progress and develop. And I think if you just look at the new generation coming up, I recently saw a statistic that, sort of Gen Zs, when they get access to sort of funds and resource, one of the first things they spend it on is consumable goods, mobile phones and things like that. And after that comes travel. So I think one of the things that we notice, particularly with this generation, is they still want to be able to travel, but they want to be able to travel sustainably. So it's just about somehow marrying the two together, I would say.
Thank you. One of the other questions that we keep, which has cropped up a couple of times as well, is what should be local government and central government's role in how we move this forward from a future fuels point of view? We've certainly heard from Kenneth from Sweden and what the government's doing there. I'm going to pass this one over to Kenneth. What kind of interventions is the Swedish government making to actually instill some of this this new technology and actually bring it to a better understanding? Kenneth, over to you.
Yeah, what the Swedish government are doing now, they are trying to work with supporting the building of an infrastructure for charging infrastructure right now. But also for hydrogen. And I would say that we are also one of the leading countries when it comes to the development of electrical road systems. Yes. So I would say that we are the Swedish government are trying to push the electrification of the transport system ahead. And I think that's really, really important. And I think, but it's also important that we try to do it together in Europe and try to harmonize our work in the future.
Understood. And yes, you seem to be doing a lot more in Sweden than perhaps we are doing here. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to ask that question of you. But I'm going back to Tom on this one as well. Tom, I'm assuming you have a view of this as well.
I mean, a lot of it comes down to government policy, I would say. And in the last week or so, we've not necessarily seen positive news on all fronts on that. So I just saw one of the questions just coming up about government policy on encouraging more people to walk or cycle. They're kind of pedaling back, that's the right word, on doing that. So, I mean, the RTFA's members, I think the future focus is very much on aviation and on heavy goods vehicles. So we'll always need heavy goods vehicles, I think, to deliver food. And this is a massively different model of how we organise our society. So on a personal transport level, I think government's policy is still electrification, just delayed. But from our perspective, there's definitely a future for renewable fuels in the heavier sectors. I
would tend to agree. I think at the moment that's been left behind. there's been quite a lot of work on BEVs, but as Fiona's been saying as well, even though there are BEV or battery electric HGVs available at the moment, the range of such vehicles is so remote and so limited that actually for most applications they're not particularly useful. So I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, there's an interesting question which I'm going to pass to the panelists as well. Will we be able to carry out electrification of our bus and coach networks in the UK by 2035 and bring in hydrogen bus coach fleets? Who wants to take that one? Any volunteers?
I could have a go. It's slightly out of my area because electric buses are not possibly a core part of the RTFA's brief. But in a previous role, I worked for the Department for Transport in their low carbon teams. So spoke to a number of bus operators in my time, and a lot of them are trialing different technologies, whether it be electric buses, gas buses, hydrogen buses, and so on. And they've all got pros and cons, and it will depend particularly on whether it's a rural bus route or a city bus route, where the depots are. So what people tended to favour with hydrogen buses was to produce the hydrogen at the depot, which then gives you almost a comparable-ish demand for electricity at the depot as if you were recharging buses that were electric. So you still need quite a lot of network capacity for electricity to come to your depot either way. Whether we're currently in a position to say that in the future that electricity will be available at those bus depots at that time, personally, I'm sceptical, but maybe with enough effort, that would be the case.
I would agree. I know we've got 2 minutes, so I'm going to do a quick summary, go through what happens next. We've had something like 42 questions come in, of which only a fraction have really been answered at this point. So we will ask the panelists to respond to those ones. We will try and get those back to you within about a week. I'm not quite sure what the normal timeline is. I do want to just take a moment, though, to thank all the panelists and all everybody's attended. Everybody's given their time for this. It's been enlightening for me. I hope it's been as enlightening for yourselves as well. From my point of view, this has been invaluable in starting that debate that I've so much wanted to start. And I hope we can continue it and move forward with a better strategy for future fuels than perhaps we've seen up to date. On that note, I am going to thank everybody, and I certainly hope you join us for our next one. Thank you so much, panelists.